First of all, I'd like to begin with a few things about yourself. Where do you come from? Maybe you could try to explain to us how did you happen to work in film conservation and restoration? Yeah.
So I'm from Italy, and I study in Torino, and I study communication in the beginning, because at that time it was something I thought I want to do. I want to be a journalist. And then at that time there was also a lot of exam about cinema in this faculty, and then I say maybe I want to be a journalist of cinema. But then I did an Erasmus program in Paris, and it was amazing to be in Paris. And I came back in Italy, I had my degree, and I want to do a PhD. But then they told me you can have the PhD without the fellowship. And then I say, oh, okay, so maybe I go back to Paris, I do a DSS, and I study French and I work there. And I think the story began there. When I did this DSS, the still was very general, really about cinema and theory. But then there was the option to do a Leonardo project the second year, and I went to Amsterdam, and then I did the PMP preservation presentation master, and then finally we touched the film, and the love was there, and I decided I want to save films in life.
So there are some studies for restoration, preservation.
Yeah.
You can learn how to do it.
Yes, absolutely. There is this PMP in Amsterdam. When I did it, it was the first year. It was in 2004, I think, 2003, 2004. And there is the George Eastman House School, that is very famous school in the USA. But there are masters nowadays in a lot of university in Germany, in Italy, in Udine, in Germany, Frankfurt. And I think there is, no, I don't see so many students, I mean, but there is a chance to study, to become a professional in this field.
And could you maybe describe these studies? Is it like postgraduate studies, or it's masters? It's after you've done some other studies before, I guess.
Yeah, in my case, it was, in Italy at the time, university was 5 years. So I did my DSS and then a master. But the system in France was already different. So when I arrived there, I was already very old compared to the others. But they basically, masters. And I think if you study cinema before, then you're quite ready to go into the material. And I think it's very important, as what I stress our interns that are there, that it's super important to study the theory about the materials. So to know in advance what is negative, what is positive, which are the process, and then to go to touch the material. But there is today really a chance to study. There is literature, and it's important, I think, to have an overview.
So once you had your diploma, could you maybe describe your first assignments, your first job?
It took a very long time. I had my degree in Paris and in Amsterdam at the same time, because I did the same thesis in the two languages. And then I decided to stay in Paris, saying to me in a very naive way, if I think about now, it's Paris, and with my background, I will find a job. No, I went from one intern to another one. I was an intern at the Cinémathèque Française, à la Cinémathèque de la Danse, au Centre Pompidou. I was working a lot, but I was always in stage. And finally, I had my chance when the professor with who I wrote my thesis gave my CV to the ex-conservator of Roma, because they were creating this new film archive dedicated to industrial and advertising film. And they say we have these ex-students that she's basically specialized on that. And after 5 years of work placement, I had my first job even without being an intern before. Yeah.
So flash forward to now, you're head of analog film collection at the Cinematheque. Could you maybe describe your job?
Yeah.
I said a few words at the beginning, but could you describe it?
Yeah. To manage the collection, it's basically to take care of the collection. That means for the analog film collection, we basically have to take care of humidity, temperature, and to inspect some very old materials, so the nitrate, flammable film, regularly. For polyester, we are quite relaxed because they require less complicated preservation activities. And then there is the acetate that are the big part of our collection, like every archive collection, basically. And these films required quite a lot of work because they could get sick, let's say, not like nitrate with another disease. So to take care of the collection means to inspect the collection and to guarantee the good temperature and humidity. But also to take care of a collection means to make inventory when you receive new collection, to make acquisition actively. So sometimes now we don't do anymore nowadays, but in the past really to look for a producer or distributor that was going to close and say, we can take your collection with us. And this is what we call the acquisition, the activity of acquisition. And it also means not only preserve, but show you film. And that is another part of the job, so the access to the film collection, that nowadays means also a lot of selling clips for new production. In the past was basically renting film for projection. But there is these two aspects. So in a way, the preservation, that is not only what it was called in the past passive, but now we call conservative preservation, so to put the film on the shelf at a good humidity and temperature. But there is also an activity of promotion and exhibition and enhancement. And something it's very important to have to manage a collection doesn't mean to keep everything. You need some time to be sure that your film that are not in good condition and which you have a lot of copy after authorization of the right owner, depositor, or whatever, sometimes you have to make some cleaning. This is the proceed of an archive. An archive is not keeping everything, it's following some methods.
So you've talked about preservation, but you also do some restoration. So is preservation not in-house? Do you need to restore the films, and why do you do it?
Yeah. So, yes, why we have to restore? So basically, sometimes a film is in advanced decomposition condition. In this case, we make not really a restoration, but at least a first step to make preservation of this element. And we talk like a nitrate that is mostly decomposed. Nowadays we make a scan. In the past they were making a print. But the idea is that to save what we can still save. Of course we need to restore, because sometimes, and I can give you an example, we don't have any more elements of a film to show. One case for us that is quite interesting, and maybe you don't believe it, but it's a film called Malpertuis, Malperthaus, the Kümmel. We only have a unique copy that was in good condition and we want to preserve. But then we received a request from the USA and we said no, because it was a unique copy. But in the end, the director insists. We sent the copy is damaged during the projection. We don't have one more copy of the film to project. So we need to restore the film to project one classic of the Belgian cinema. Then sometimes we need to restore because nowadays we need digital support to make the heritage available. I think one of the most important example is Chantal Akerman. Cinematheque create a foundation, and we need, of course, to promote our cinema, and to make this cinema available, we need the DCP nowadays. I mean, this is a discussion for later, but this is for sure one of the reasons to face the reality. At Cinematheque, we have 90,000 titles. Of course, we will never digitize all these titles. We will never do it. This is not our mission. This is not what we want. But we have to be aware that if we want that Chantal Akerman movies are shown, we need a DCP nowadays.
So could you maybe describe to us the process of restoration now? You choose a film first. How do you choose the film you're going to restore?
Yeah. Sometimes we choose a film because we, like Malperthaus, we need this important Belgian film to be shown again. Sometimes we have other kind of condition, like we receive a special help from an institution, and so we need to stay under certain criteria, like French language or French production or these kind of things. But again, we stay on the Belgian heritage. So I would say, in a way, we try, first of all, as every film archive does, the first mission is to save the heritage of the country. Then it's important to know that we make a lot of projects in collaboration with other film archives, because we keep a lot of German and also Russian films. So sometimes we just make joint restoration projects because the only copy that survive is at Cinematheque, and this is because of the story of our institution. And when we are not, let's say, I mean, the situation in which we have to do a restoration because there are no more copy available, or the copy are completely all faded, sometimes we do some international project. So we are part of the FIAF, that is the International Federation of Film Archive. It was created in 1938, and La Cinémathèque Royale de Belgique joined the FIAF in 1938, so from the very beginning. One of the missions of the FIAF is to work together. So I think in the past we did more. Now we're doing less for a lot of reasons. But it's important that film archives that have more means. So basically, European or American film archives help country, they have less facilities. I think about this amazing movie that is called Io Soy Cuba, that it's a masterpiece of Cuban cinema that was restored not through a FIAF project, with another project, but there are treasures all over the world that need to be restored, not only preserved. In that case, they really need to be restored. And it's important that archive sometimes dedicate some effort to that. We are basically working most of the time with African films. In the last project we did it.
So once you've chosen the movie you're going to restore, what's the first step you have to do?
The first step is clear the right. Yes. I mean, we have a small internal commission, or at least we had in the past. And of course, we need a programmer because they know which film is important. We need the film collection because we know if we have or not the good elements. But the right is the first things. Because if you don't clear the right, you cannot do anything. So first step, clear the right. Then to look for the best material, that basically is an original negative. In Belgium, we had the chance that in the past, even if there is no what is called the mandatory deposit that exists in other country. So when you make a film, you need to deposit a copy to the film archive. In Belgium, there was something not wrote, but that worked much better. So the lab were going the original materials to the Cinematheque. So most of the Belgian film that have been produced in Belgium are the original negative are with us. So this is a very big chance. But sometimes, of course, this is not the case. So we have to look for the negative where they are, and we try to have the negative back. That basically means to pay the lab that preserve the negative for a very long time.
And what do you do with this negative once you get your hands on it?
We ask to our colleagues to inspect the negative and to see the condition of these negatives. Then nowadays we work on digital like a normal workflow. It's completely normal and natural to work only on digital. It was not when I did my thesis in 2004 about the use of digital restoration in film archives. And 20 years later, there are questions we were asking to ourselves 20 years ago that not only we don't ask anymore, but they became something completely normal. So first step is to do to clean the film in something that is just called washing machine. Then we scan the film. Some scanner are what is called a wet gate. So wet gate is a place where you can basically wash your film. So in this case, you don't wash before, but we don't have it, and it's also a choice. And then after the scan, you start the restoration process of images. After that part, this is the best workflow. Sometimes there is overlapping of phases. There is the grading. So you take care of to grade the film, because when you make a scanner, you scan, we say the word flat. So you capture as much as you can, but there is no colors or black and white contrast. And then there is the last part in which you have to take care of formatting your film and all the things. And of course, beside that, you have to think about the sound. The sound has to be scanned and restored like the image.
Do you have to clean the sound as well?
Yeah, there are nowadays, there is basically one only scanner for the sound that only take care of the sound, that is Sondor. So it's the only label that really take care of that. And in fact, the sound is read, and when the machine read the sound, find the little dirty, the little stuff that are not okay, and they are restoring basically like we restore image. But then there are also tools to restore the sound.
Do you have a laboratory in the Cinematheque? Do you do it all in-house?
We had a long tradition of lab. So we have a photochemical lab from the 80s. It was called Poincaré because it was on that area. And I like to remember that in this lab was working Desmet, that is the person that create the method to reproduce the tinting and toning process on silent film on analog. And this is something that you study on the books. And when you arrive in Brussels and you work for the Film Archive and you study about the SMAT method before, you feel like in paradise, something like that. And then from 2013, it was created the digital lab. And 3 years ago, we closed the analog laboratory.
When you talked about how you choose the movies, do you feel like you have some kind of responsibility in the history of cinema with the movies that you choose and the one you do not choose?
Yes, because in a way it's simple, because sometimes you choose the film because you have no more good copy available for projection. So the choice is really made on the fact that you don't have any more a good copy and you stay on the Belgian heritage. But when you have the chance maybe to work or I don't know, in a film that comes from abroad, then you really feel the responsibility, because why one film and not another one? I think on the heritage of the country it's easier because you have much more chance to restore. And there are films that sometimes you just cannot restore because you cannot clear the right. This is very frustrating, and then I feel guilty because I think this film is important and we cannot do anything. In that case, not only me, I mean, we feel guilty, yes.
I guess for Déjà s'envole la fleur maigre, it was obvious that you had to restore this movie, but you told us that the restoration took place in 2015 and that things had changed since it was 10 years ago, and things would have been done maybe differently today. So could you maybe explain to us why restoring a movie only 10 years ago was different than today?
I think the big difference is the scanner that changed a lot in 10 years. The scanners are available nowadays. They have much more possibility to scan better the image, but also I think it's in the part of the restoration of the image. Today there are basically two software that all Film Archive use. There is not a real competition, or two different software. The amount that was especially made for Film Archive, because I remember when I was writing my thesis, the amount was at the very beginning, and sometimes to delete the 3 dust it can take half an hour. Nowadays the amount, it's a software that goes super fast, and the other one is Phoenix, that is much more expensive and is also is a different tools. But the things we have at disposal are much more, let's say, powerful. And also, it's not only maybe a reason of means in general, but it's about what we have at disposal at Cinematheque at that time. Because Christophe, my colleague, explained to me that we restored the film with Revival. That is, it's okay, of course, to make the cleaning of the image, but you cannot compare Revival with the amounts of Phoenix that are especially made for digital restoration. And yeah, I think there is a big difference because the machines are different.
So the technology went ahead, and then the laboratory in the Cinematheque got better as well, or better equipped. Yeah. Maybe we have questions in the audience, or people who want to react, or not. I have other questions anyway. Yes? We have a mic because it's coming to you.
Je me demandais pour le film Déjà s'envole la fleur maigre, quels étaient les, les principaux dégâts qu'on voit sur la pellicule et comment est-ce qu'on... Si j'ai bien compris, vous utilisez vous nettoyez le film et puis une fois que le film est nettoyé, vous numérisez image par image et puis vous travaillez avec un logiciel pour restaurer les images. Mais donc ma question c'était quels sont les dégâts qui peuvent être vus sur un film, quoi.
Oui, on peut répondre en,
Oui.
en
En fait,
français.
donc, les problèmes principaux sur ce film, c'est que les perforations du négatif étaient piquées. Donc, en fait, ça veut dire que les perforations sont abîmées. Donc, cela fait que, donc, nous, à l'époque, on avait un scanner qui s'appelle Nerdlight, qui est un très bon scanner, mais qui est très, très sensible. Donc, en fait, c'est un scanner qui était très, très sensible, par exemple, à ce type de défaut-là. Et cela produit beaucoup d'instabilité pendant les scans. Donc, en fait, même si vous avez un système de stabiliser le film après, ça n'empêche pas que tout ça provoque un problème de stabilité. Après, les négatifs étaient sales. Parce qu'en fait, j'ai noté que le film de 1960 et les négatifs sont arrivés à Cinémathèque en 77. Donc, 17 ans après. Donc, en fait, c'est possible, c'est ce que mon collègue Christophe m'expliquait, que les perfos étaient piqués parce qu'en fait, il y a eu des passages dans des tireuses, ils ont été faits d'autres copies. Et aussi, c'est peut-être aussi à cause de ça que les négatifs étaient sales. Et en fait, à l'époque, avec un software comme Revival, vous ne pouviez pas nettoyer l'image comme vous pouvez faire aujourd'hui. Mais encore, je pense, c'est quelque chose dont on a discuté avec mes collègues pour présenter cette masterclass. C'était une époque, il y a 10 ans, où on n'allait pas si loin que comme on fait aujourd'hui. Et encore, je tiens à préciser que nous sommes une cinémathèque et nous faisons un travail d'archives. Donc, par exemple, je pense que l'exemple plus clair, c'est par exemple quand vous voyez un film de 1910 restauré par Cinémathèque, les films restent quand même très sales. Pourquoi ? Parce que nous, on pense que c'est un film de 1910 et c'est vrai qu'à l'époque, les films étaient peut-être parfaits, mais nous, on ne va pas nettoyer les films jusqu'à un niveau super avancé parce que c'est un film qui a 100 ans. Il y a d'autres institutions privées qui, pour les mêmes films, dépensent énormément d'argent et vous donnent une version complètement nettoyée. Donc, c'est aussi des choix. Je t'en prie.
Is there another question or reaction?
Maybe me. What is the when you restore a film? What is the final destination of the film? Do you restore it for the cinema or for the Blu-ray or because if I've seen a masterclass at Cinematheque about the Godfather, and it was Zootrop, the company by Coppola, who restored the film, but they restore it each 5 years to fit the use of the film, so to be perfect for the platforms, for the airplanes. What is your philosophy?
So our philosophy as a film archive is we restore the film to make available the film for a movie theater. That's our philosophy. So that means we restore now in 4K or 2K. It depends on the quality of the film, on the original materials. It depends from a lot of factors. But our idea is we want a DCP to project the film in the movie theater on the big screen. Of course, my colleagues create also ProRes and other kind of files because sometimes, a lot of time, we need to put the film at disposal for programmer for viewing the film, or we have to sell footage of the film. But the main goal is the movie theater. And in this case, it's also interesting because the film was made on DVD because it was an anniversary in 2015 when the film it was restored. And at the time, Cinematheque was still making a DVD. In this DVD, there is a small booklet. So in this case, I think the philosophy was a little bit different. It was not only for the projection, but it was also for the DVD purpose. Nowadays, we were completely different. Our mission is we create a DCP 2K or 4K for the movie theater. And then, of course, maybe we have the film on platform, we have the film in a small phone, but this is other things. Yeah.
Thank you.
When you talked about the movie from 1910, you said that you restore it, but still it's a movie which is 100 years old, and you should be able to see it on screen. Is it important for you that the traces of time are still visible on the movie that you restore? Because a film is a moving material, so do you have to keep these traces of time? Is it important for you?
The idea, the ethic of every restoration is to give to the audience the film as soon as possible, similar to what has been seen by the audience at the time the film was produced. Today we are in this big compromise that we switch from film to digital. So we already know, all of us, that we are not really faithful to the original because we are restoring on digital and the film was shown on film. But basically what we try to do is we have a reference copy and we try to work with the director of photography of the director if he's still alive and to restore a movie and to give to the audience, like we did with Chantal Akerman, what was so in Cannes at the time. For a film that is all like a film that is 100 years old, it's mostly a choice of Cinematheque not to spend hours and hours and hours to clean a film. Also because we have a reduced amount of human resource. But of course, I will never criticize who want to restore and make super clean a film of 1910, because at the time the film was clean. And of course, the trace of the time. When we restore a film, we are there to give back the good color and to give the film clean, if it was clean in the original. Of course, we work, for instance, on an African film that was shot on a film that was expired. And because of that, there was some blue area on the film. When my colleagues restored the film, they left these blue traces, even if digital you can correct, because the film was made like that, which is the problem. When you see the film on film, you hardly see the blue. On digital, you see a lot the blue. This film was even selected by the BFI for a project for which they put back on film some digital restoration, and in the end they decide to put it out of the list, this film, because of that. Because when they did the test, this blue was there a lot. So This is another point that is difficult when you make a digital restoration. This happens a lot with animation. When you do on film, there are things that you don't see, and it's fine. When you scan, like we have some good example of our Czech colleague that we saw a lot of animation. When they scan the film, they see things that they're not supposed to see on film. So they have to clean because you're not supposed to see certain things. So it's in digital you capture sometimes things you don't supposed to capture or that you don't see on film.
So you have to find the right balance between respecting the spirit of the movie and correcting it, but because you have another way to screen it.
Yeah, the main problem I think is when you face with this kind of particular situation, when there is something that is there, but if you stay on film, you hardly see the problem, so it's fine. But when you go through digital, you see everything because the scanner captures everything, and then you have to try to give to the audience what was seen at that time. But I also have a good example in this sense. Cinematheque restore the film that is called Les Moulins Maudits. In this film, the film has been restored on photochemical, and then a scan was made of this positive. And there is this final sequence that is super intense, and it's super complicated to understand what is going on. And at a certain point, I was preparing a program for some students about that. I was watching this movie and I was saying it's very strange. Then I spoke with my colleague Bruno and he said, yeah, it always a reason of doubt for me, these films. So we say, let's make an experiment. Let's go back to the nitrate. And the nitrate came to the archive. They scan again on the North Light, and we discover, long time later, then this sequence was in blue. And this blue give all the meaning at the film, because that means that this again night. And in this long night, these horrible things happen. But in the analog print, the blue is completely disappear. It's complicated.
So that's the history of the film, the pellicule itself. That's important.
Yeah, and also when you work on photochemical, we say every time you make a new printer, you lose detail. Then there is a kind of myth that on digital you don't lose anything. It's not true. It's not so true, but that's the idea. The thing is that sometimes in digital, thanks to the new scanner, you can capture something that you didn't have on analog, and it can make you understand in the film.
Do we have another question or reaction? No one. I think it's time because we have another screening after that. But before we leave, I'd like to ask you, were you given a very good advice that you would like to share with somebody who would like to work in Film Archive today, or would you have just from yourself a good advice to give?
I will say that there are a lot of books in a lot of school. So really go through the literature, go through the theory before to approach the film that is getting more and more old and is a fragile element, and you need a lot of care. Think about that you are kind of archaeologue, and then things in terms of heritage, and think that this heritage doesn't belong to you, to your country, it belongs to everyone. So that your work is super important because you save films for the future, not only for you, but for the generation to come. You have to be very generous to do this job, I think, and passionate.
So you're a little part of history. So it's
Yes.
important to do it with all your heart.
I think it's important to have this idea that we don't work for one country or for one film. We work for the worldwide heritage, and it's important that our mission is for the future generation to come. And it's you have to look very far to have a global vision of what you do.
Thank you very much, Ariana,
you.
for sharing all your experience with us.
Thank you.
The next masterclass will be on Thursday, the 19th of December, and the movie should be Animal from Emma Benestan, and I hope we'll see you then. And
We
maybe-
don't know anymore what will be the
yeah, we
the-
don't know the
profession.
theme right now, but the movie should be Animal. So we'll see you then in a month. Thank you very much, Ariana.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.